Welcome everybody to BIM Broadcast. Those of you joining in, we are watching the chat stream, so if you want to say hello or ask questions of our guest today, by all means, jump in and ask questions. Our goal is to make this an interactive discussion today. We are going to be joined by Wyatt Crane, Program Manager at CTC Developers. We're going to talk about using the API to achieve different tasks in Revit and what is the API and what all that means. So Wyatt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shawn. Hello, everyone.
So, Wyatt, before we really jump in, we know your name now, Wyatt Crane, but who is Wyatt? How did you get into the world of BIM? How did you kind of get to your position of doing program management and API development?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story. I think, like a lot of people in tech, I wandered from various directions. It started, I got my architectural technician degree, probably 98, I think it was. And I had to, it's funny, at the time, my wife had to teach me how to use Windows in order to work with CAD, because the last time before was no interface. So I picked up on that actually really quickly, which surprised me. And it just seemed to kind of work for me. But, so I went through that. I really enjoyed working with CAD for some reason. It just kind of, it was, I don't know. I mean, I had always been kind of artistic, and I suppose that there is a little crossover. But so I actually was an intern and then worked in the industry for a couple of years as a draftsman, essentially, using AutoCAD. And, but like the tech, took some technology courses, network technology, and a little bit of application programming, and went back in, started building computers, eventually got a job back at the place I was at when I started, but in the IT department this time.
Right.
So yeah, then I started just kind of working we were doing this BIM initiative, and this was, I think, 2003. I know, Shawn, you and I had connected way back then.
We had.
That's right. We had some various things going on, and a guy I work with that works here now also, he was programming, working with Revit, and we developed a few things there in-house, and then ended up coming here after a couple of years as a contractor.
Yeah.
And headed up this effort to kind of move more into developing applications, being a software developer at CTC.
So from 1998, going from not knowing Windows to computer science's introduction to running programs.
Yes.
Nice. Very good. That's awesome. So let that be a lesson to all of you out there. If you're like, I don't know how to do this stuff. Hey man, you don't have to know, you just have to learn, right? That's the goal.
Right. So yeah, same thing. Just if you have an interest, do it in your own time, I guess.
That's right.
It'll come. Opportunities will come if you have kind of a goal to do it. So
absolutely. Yeah. So we're talking a lot of these days about programming on top of BIM applications, or any application for that matter. We're doing a lot of add-ins in different industries and things. And you at CTC Developers, you guys write add-ins primarily for the Autodesk suite of tools, right?
Yeah. And our main focus currently is Revit Tools, but we also develop on Civil 3D platform as well.
Nice.
So productivity enhancers for both. They just hook right into the software.
Yep. And how do you actually interface with the software? I mean, Autodesk writes their own tools, so they write Revit and they write AutoCAD. So how do you actually get access to the commands and controls inside of a tool set like that?
Yeah, well, like many of those pre-written software packages, they have a application programming interface, and you always hear API, or
API,
you
yeah.
that. Yep.
Exactly.
So, and what that is really, it's a way to get to or use the inner workings of the core of whatever that application is. So I'll use Revit most often in example, but to get to do things that are a little bit more efficient, that maybe don't make sense to try to push a bunch of buttons to do, it keeps it separated. You don't get to the code. You don't get anything that Autodesk writes.
Right.
And it's just a way to interact.
But they give you, basically they give you access to the things they want you to have access to.
Absolutely.
Different
Yep. And some
commands
of
and
it,
controls to automate.
yeah, and it's always been, like there is quite a bit of few things that we would like to have still, but given what we can actually do with Revit, it's pretty astounding how much they have actually provided access to.
So, I mean, you guys have been doing Revit programming for a while. How many tools have you written that are like maybe publicly available right now for Revit?
Yeah, so exact count, I don't know. It's funny. I counted a while ago, and we've added a couple since then.
Yeah.
We have several suites of tools that are kind of task focused or role focused. So we have project suite, which contains a lot of tools that are generally useful day-to-day working with project models. Then we have the manager suite, which kind of higher level. You can affect more changes. You can really do a lot of things very quickly, saving a lot of manager time.
Right.
And
BIM managers, like not like project managers, but like BIM manager time.
BIM managers.
BIM managers.
Yep,
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And again, that's still within the Revit context.
Right.
We have a batch suite that has some useful tools for plotting or extracting family objects from projects or loading them in large batch.
Right.
We have a data suite, which is gaining a lot of traction right now. A couple of tools in there, just farming data out of your projects, finding out performance.
Let's talk about that one for just a minute here. So one of the things with that API, the programming interface that a lot of people have been wanting to do is gain access to more of the background information. Now, Revit itself technically is a database, right?
Yeah, it's a file that contains data. It's not in the true sense of a database that we have, where a SQL or something. It's
proprietary.
Yes, and it has the only interface to that is through Revit.
Right, but it is, by definition of what a database is, it's interrelated information that talks to each other, internally keeps itself consistent. So it's not like AutoCAD where you move a line and you have to go to another drawing and move a line there as well. In Revit, you move an object and it's moved the same place everywhere throughout the model, and the data is accessible anywhere. So, I mean, loosely, it's a database.
Let's call it that. Let's call it a database.
But again, it's very proprietary.
You're right. I mean, the concept is these discrete files, and they have a load of data about your design.
Right.
Some of it's building information. Some of it's about the relationships with objects, the definitions of objects. So yeah, I mean, in that theory, it's almost a three-dimensional database, if you want to think of it that way.
But the problem is, and you mentioned this already, the only way to access the data for a Revit model is to be in Revit. There's no external controls that lets you extract data, right?
That's correct. There are some things we can get just from reading the kind of the top of the file itself. But for all of that really interesting stuff, the parameters of certain objects in the model, you have to go through Revit. Revit has to be running.
Right. So that's why a lot of the developers out there of tools are writing add-ins to Revit, because Revit is then open and its programming interface gives you access to that data structure to manipulate, to create, to extract that information via some kind of an add-in.
Yep. That's correct.
And so the data suite, you're taking that information. One of the cool things about that suite is you're pulling that data and instead of leaving it inside of Revit, you're actually making it accessible to other tool sets, like you're going to SQL, right?
Yep. SQL is one way you can store that data, and with the data suite, that's probably the most, I'd say, flexible way to store it, because then you can have other applications that interact with SQL Server, making queries, presenting the data, analyzing the data. Our data suite comes with a Power BI template, and that's just it's a free tool, and it's a suggestion. Really, it's like, here's what we think you might find interesting. But we love seeing how our customers have you know, use that information to analyze certain things.
Right.
Hey, if we upgraded our systems, we'd shave a minute off of, save times, and that
That adds
saves
up.
us $40,000. And if we upgraded systems, it's just a math problem after
Right.
that. So but without having that information, you wouldn't be able to prove the ROI. So
Right. You can guess, you can make assumptions, but until you have hard numbers, and in some cases with tools like that, API-based tools that are add-ins, you can more readily extract and prove the value of certain changes you might make, or certain healthcare model updates you might maintain to kind of see how that affects performance. That's pretty cool.
yeah, we're it's pretty exciting, kind of a newer direction for us to be able to. It kind of broadens the entire spectrum of things that we can do now, and show people
Right.
this. This is just one tool, and making the whole thing more efficient.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about other apps, right? We've got, not we, you guys have a whole bunch of other tools that are available. You mentioned 4 different suites of tools. There's actually, I think, 5 suites of tools you guys offer. Throughout those suites, it's like 30, 40 different tools that are available. How do you guys go about determining what is a good tool to invest time in? Because obviously writing code and writing extra add-ins for Revit, that's not necessarily just a trivial task. It takes effort. It takes knowing the API controls, and while anybody can technically learn it, it still takes time. So how do you at CTC Developers figure out what is best to invest your time in?
Well, often, I guess our tools are probably a 50-50 mix of somebody here had a great idea, or they heard a common problem in the industry. Our AE staff, they're always talking to customers. They're always going to consult. They're always learning what problems people encounter. And so a lot of the tools just came from, hey, it'd be great. There's so many people that they just stumble over this roadblock all the time. If we had a tool that just could help them over that hurdle.
Right.
Some of the other tools come to us from our customers, and they're kind of like, we'd like to have a tool that does this specific thing, addresses a certain situation, and if we're thinking about it, we're like, well, that would really benefit a lot of people. Then we have like a different arrangement with them, and we'll work out something where, okay, we'll build it for you guys. You help us develop it, give us it was your idea, so help us make it work the best possible way in the best interface, and then we'll put it in one of our suites.
Right.
So we've had a lot of tools come out of that have been really great ideas.
And then you guys also do just like purely custom programming that never sees the public tool set, right? Like you've got, I mean, the public tool set that's up on your website, the ctcexpresstools.com website, that's just a percentage of the tools. Like there's a lot of other stuff that's truly proprietary just for the clients, and it's only for them.
Yeah, and there's 2 reasons generally for that. Either the tool that we built for them, it really is a specific process. It's really proprietary, and in that fact alone is just that it doesn't apply to a broad audience.
Right.
And there's also, we've had a couple of cases where we thought it was a great idea, and we gave them the option of, hey, we'll co-develop this. You help us design it and test it. But they really wanted to hang on to that competitive advantage. So
sure.
That's another reason. But yeah, we have several tools like that. Many of them do some pretty neat things, but it's just kind of one of them, for example, is a prefab building walls, or concrete walls, right? So it takes proprietary data of theirs, and it just builds the entire thing in all of those prefab panels, and essentially that's the data comes from someplace that nobody else has access to. So
right.
But it's a neat tool. I mean, it's fun to see things like that work. Just automatically builds a building.
Exactly. Cool. So when you're going through and putting a program like this together, what are some of the steps that you go through to figure out what features and what it's going to look like, and like how do you guys go through that exercise? Because that's not a small task either.
No, yeah, that's correct. I mean, what we end up often doing is asking some key questions, and um, customers come to us a couple of ways. The most common is they have an idea or they have something that isn't quite optimal in their
Hmm.
process, and they hear about, oh, you can, there's tools that are similar, or it does this, but we want it to do this as well. So sometimes they come to us with ideas like that, and they're like, yeah, I'd like it to work like this tool, but our specific product or whatever it is we design needs to be a little different than that.
Right.
Um, so they come to us for that, or they may come to us with an idea. We just want something that's really easy for people to use and I'll use a loose example here. Maybe we want something that'll set up everything in a project immediately for us according to our standards and
Right.
pull from here, pull from there. And we want it to be a push button. So what we then ask them is, okay, that's a great idea, but what if is there something else that already does this out there? Because custom development can take a long time. It can be quite expensive,
Right.
or let's say it's more than what a lot of people would expect. We take a lot of time to do it right, and one of those is we just want to make sure that it is the right solution.
Right.
So
Right.
finding out, is it really, like, is it part of the is it going to cover part of the problem? Is it going to present other problems?
Right.
Is there something that's, as I said, already does it? Or maybe sometimes it's just like, well, I think maybe a little education
Yeah.
on
Education's a big
using
thing.
a tool,
Yep. A
and
little bit
and
of
you'll
setup, a little
see.
bit of education. That sometimes can be a big first step, and then maybe the customization isn't quite as required.
Right, right. And so we always, even in our development, we try to do that, take on that fiduciary arrangement with the client. We want to make sure that, based on our experience and knowledge, that they're going to get something that truly solves their problem.
Sounds
And
like sometimes you guys almost try to talk yourself out of a job for the benefit of
uh,
the client.
I don't think that that ever happens.
Right.
We just keep getting busier.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and I think it's because they trust us. We're not just going to try to sell them something that,
Right.
for the sake of getting that payoff.
Here's $1 million project, pay us, take it or leave it, right? You guys try to actually help the client a bit, get them to the best possible workflow. And if dev is a part of that, then fantastic. And if it's not, then fantastic, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd take $1 million development project, but something like that for us, it definitely would be a large undertaking, and
Sure.
and I have found often that it is a combination of things. So a
Right.
little bit of customization, a little change in a workflow, and that's where we have experts to consult in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a whole team effort, even outside of our dev.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's say somebody let's take a transition away from what CTC Developers does. Let's say somebody wanted to dig in a little bit to the API themselves. How can they learn more about it if they feel like it's something that they wanted to take on?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to approach that. So I'm sure, specifically with Revit, um, there's a large movement into using Dynamo to automate certain things.
Right.
Dynamo is a scripting interface. It's a modular programming kind of system. So it's visual, it's modular. You grab a node, you drag it here, you connect something, that node does something that affects the next thing. And what's good about it is that it helps you kind of get an idea of how to break things down into certain tasks or little processes.
Right.
And so you start that way, understand the concepts of how things flow through, and um, and it interacts with Revit through Revit's API. But
Right.
you don't need to know how to necessarily write any language or write any code. Um, it helps to
Sure.
write, but sometimes it doesn't do everything you need. It's
Right.
90% maybe.
Right. So
So
let's say Dynamo is a good entry level. What about, you guys don't use Dynamo at CTC Developers though, right? That's not your primary development tool.
we do not, again, because it's primarily for in-house, I would say in-house use,
Right.
or
One-off routines.
right,
It's not very
exactly.
distributable, really. I mean, you can't if I wanted to in my company sit down and write a Dynamo routine and distribute it to 100, 150 users, that's not, super simple to do if it was Dynamo because you have to
Right.
do a lot of setup. So if you wanted a packaged product that's easy to distribute and a little easier to maintain, what would a person want to investigate in that case?
So generally, the best approach is to start with if knowing a certain programming language. With Revit, the two primary are C Sharp, which is a Microsoft programming language,
Yep.
and you can also do Visual Basic, and both of those are built on top of something called .NET,
Okay.
which is Microsoft technology,
Yeah.
and very widely used,
Right.
very mature technology.
Revit itself
So,
is based on what, C, .NET C, right?
just C primarily.
Yeah.
The core of Revit is C.
Right.
There's so many modules to it that a lot of those are actually written in C sharp or
Yep.
in really the language you write it in the end, that's just how you're telling it to do certain things.
Right.
But primarily, once it's built and runs as a program, that's the .NET platform.
Right. Right. So, say I wanted to learn more about the Revit API. Is there some places
Mhm.
I can go to find out more about that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of really good resources. Revit, I think it's API, Revit API. I think we pulled it up earlier. I'm sorry, I
Let me
forgot
see
to
if I can
reference
pull
it,
this
but
up real quick here. I think I
yeah,
got, so I got the Revit Developer Center right here
yeah.
pulled up.
So the
Um,
Developer Center is good because it's a community. It
yep.
has a lot of community information. It's subscription based. So if you plan to do a lot of work with Revit, Revit's API, it's a good resource to have that can provide support, um, and that's a starting point, I guess. For a lot of people, probably the best starting point would be something like the Building Coder. That website gives you an idea of what you can do with Revit,
Right.
or with this particular product, its API.
Yep.
This guy's really good at what he does.
That's
He
Jeremy Tamick,
writes,
right?
yes,
He's been with Revit or doing Revit coding for quite a long time, since the beginning, if I recall correctly.
yeah, and he writes things that are, um, it's not like necessarily a tutorial or a how to or walkthrough or a getting started. It's kind of a here's what here's how you can do this. Here's a way that others have solved this problem.
Yep.
So it's great, and there's tons of articles on here.
Yeah.
And then more specifically, there's the Revit Help Center or the Revit API. I think you have that tab open somewhere there. Okay, so this one's version specific. Once you've gotten into and the programming interface, you're working in C Sharp, and you want to find out how do I access the properties of some particular object.
Right.
Then you'll find a list of methods here, and you'll find what their overloads are, what all of this stuff is
Right.
that's important to that object.
Yep. So it's good to know the language they're talking about. In this case, .NET, primarily C Sharp.NET, and then being able to call that information in some form in the program or the program authoring tool that you're using. Probably something
Yeah.
like Visual Studio. So this will help you greatly kind of figure out what the different calls mean and how to leverage them. And so you guys, I mean, you're using this quite regularly yourselves, I would imagine, trying to figure out how to access different things you haven't touched before.
Yeah, my guys, they're pretty well versed by this time. They, collectively we have
Right.
over 20 years, and
Yep.
so they're oftentimes we have various libraries. We interact with our libraries that we've built that interact with the Revit API far more than we do directly anymore.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
But for them, sometimes there's something gets added or deprecated, and they need to find out, okay, what is it now? What did it change to? Usually
Well,
that's
how did
something.
Autodesk mess with us today?
Yeah, it's something that we see just generally when a new version of Revit comes out.
Sure,
So,
sure. All right. So let's say somebody came to you with Dynamo script, right? Because that's visual programming using the same API in a different way. How would you guys go about maybe taking a Dynamo script and converting it into a distributable program that's a bit more pro? Do you guys have a path for that, or is that, what would your thoughts be on that front?
well, it's an interesting scenario because often when we get approached about that, it's one of two things, maybe a third case, but we get some scripts that do maybe one or two functions on their own,
Mm-hmm.
and what they really want is they want something that every user in their company can use.
Right.
So they're not a Dynamo, they don't have any Dynamo experience. And the way that Dynamo works is that, you either have a script that does something very discrete and performs the function, and then you run the next script, or you have a series of nodes, and you connect these little snippets of code basically together. And when you want it to do something, run through and change a bunch of things, and then you want to say, now I want to run it again, but this time I want it to change a bunch of other things.
Right.
Sometimes you can disconnect one and hook another one up, and then pick something from a list, and then
But it takes being interactive with it.
It does, and so that's where they run up against that issue where it's harder, or maybe it's still more efficient than doing it manually, but it's not efficient enough. And also there's this challenge of maintaining as Dynamo versions change.
Right.
Maintaining all these scripts, finding all the libraries that you were referencing before. It gets to be a real difficult management task. So
right.
They come to us and they basically say, we'd like it to do this. We have these scripts, or we have these Dynamo programs that we can run, but we got to make it so somebody can just push a few buttons and it'll do what it needs to do
consistently without failing and without having extra wire movements and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's really just putting an interface on something that they've already defined what the process will be. We don't often, we rarely ever do any direct conversion of the code. So Dynamo, in the background, it uses a language called Python, which is a scripting language.
Yep.
And then custom modules are Python also. There are conversion tools. However, I've found that they're a little bit inconsistent. And then again, it's kind of like, well, let's examine this process and see if we can make it more efficient.
Right.
And by doing so, it just makes more sense. We start from scratch. We do a full rewrite. We put the interface on it that the client likes, and then we'll provide it in any version of Revit that they want. We can make it so that they just distribute it, either network or just a double-click installation.
Yep.
So a lot of things we can, and we also provide documentation on the tools that we write. So, yeah. And the second one is there's a second main scenario is that a lot of I'd say probably half of them, it's like, yeah, I got it 70% of the way, but I just keep running into it. It breaks here, or I can't do that last 25% or last 20% that would make it efficient. So we generally can solve things through the .NET API in a more efficient and almost 95% of the way in the most challenging situations.
Nice. So let's kind of change tack here a little bit. I know you see a lot of things coming up in the world of BIM. You interface with a lot of clients. What have you seen that's like super exciting coming on the pipeline in BIM? Maybe developer related, maybe not. Like what's the thing that gets you excited about, hey, this is like super freaking cool?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that I think are really big movements lately are both data centric. So There's the big push by Autodesk to move their products to more of a cloud backend of
Sure.
things, where we're still working with the CAD software on our system, but a lot of the information kind of goes back and forth, interacts with other systems, and that's something that has taken a long time for them to get in place. They've put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential there, and really, the other side of that is the data that comes out of it.
Right.
So I'm astounded, as we mentioned with the data suite. There's other applications out there that do similar things, but the data that comes out, um, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what was important when it comes to a Revit model, and I keep learning from our customers and from our experts here, just by the questions they ask. Hey, can I see this on the X and then the Y, and then I want this other third, bit of data in here over
Yeah.
time, because that's going to show me that. And I'm like, man, that's really cool. I wouldn't have thought of that, and
Right.
trying to they're trying to visualize something that I never knew was something to see. So it's pretty cool as far as the kind of information we're getting out of Revit now.
Yep.
And I would imagine that once the Forge platform, Autodesk's Forge platform, becomes more robust, and I think we'll probably start to see some really big solutions out there that'll be interesting.
Right. Yeah. Forge has been a big push. We've had some discussions on Forge before, in our system and in our discussions here on BIM broadcast, and it's a pretty cool thing where you can take the data, and it really is cloud hosted in Autodesk system, and you can. I mean, it's the same platform they're using for their BIM 360 stuff that they're doing, where they can parse through the data in a very meaningful way. So I mean, I'm looking forward to that as well. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, kind of like Amazon, the way Amazon did it,
Yeah.
where they became an online bookstore, and
Yeah.
they needed that infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So they developed something and then started kind of providing it, as they were like, hey, this is a pretty cool system. Now we have Amazon Web Services.
Right.
So it's kind of a similar idea.
Yep.
Who knows? Maybe we'll have CTC Web Services soon.
Hey, there you go. That'd be cool.
That's a bigger project. We'll
Well,
see.
yeah, it's a little bigger, a little bigger.
Yeah.
So, this is kind of one of my favorite parts in the show, when I get to ask the guest an interesting question and see what they come up with. So, actually, it's not a question that I'm asking necessarily. It's giving you a platform to talk about whatever. So, 60-second soapbox, Wyatt. I told you about this ahead of time. I don't know what you're going to talk about. What is it that you want to share with the world in your little 60-second soapbox of fame?
Okay. Well, I think I didn't put a very large amount of thought into it, but something that actually, this is kind of a more personal approach to work and life in general, is it ties into what we do. We're trying to make things a little more interesting, a little less tedious, and more accurate. And um, it's applications that solve issues. It's better systems. It's more comfortable chairs. It's all that stuff. It all works together. I think that we're going to see, probably in the future here, a time where we'll have, hopefully, more free time to actually enjoy things that don't come with a screen in front. And I've made a sort of personal effort to really kind of broaden what I do as in my free time. And I don't know, I think, there's a lot of fear that robots are going to take over the world, and we'll all lose our jobs. And I'm thinking, I mean,
Great.
I could work less. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Go enjoy
So
the Jeep trails a bit more here and there, and whatever.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
See the world. See the beautiful environment in which we live. So it's not just working to eat. It's you go have some fun.
Yep.
Get
Yep.
up behind
So
that screen. Yeah.
that's my soapbox right now. I'll tell anybody that asks that. Yep.
Nice. Very good. Well, Wyatt, thank you so much for your time today. One other thing that we're going to talk about real quick here is Built is coming up. It's right around the corner, August 9th through the 11th. Those of you that are going, I look forward to seeing you there. I'll be there at Built. I know CTC Development will be there with the CTC Express Tools booth. I'll probably be hanging out there quite a bit. And so stop by and say hello. And look forward to seeing you all and enjoying classes and learning a ton of information. And of course, Autodesk University is up and coming too. So if you're going to miss Built for whatever reason, hopefully you can drop out at AU and I'll catch you guys out that way and say hello again. And
Oh yeah, that's registration coming soon.
yeah, very soon, right? It's like
End
within
of
a couple
August or
of days.
something.
Yeah, end of August. There you go. A couple of weeks. So
Hmm.
definitely make sure you're planning for that. Talk to your teams about it. Get people ready to go to these different events. I mean, meeting people and getting together at these different forums are fantastic. Learning specialized information. It's better than just a training class in general. Like you get 3-4 days of a huge variety of information, and so you get great ideas and great networking. Talk to other people in the industry. So definitely show up to those events if you can. We look forward to seeing you there. I'm at pretty much all of them, so we'll be seeing you guys in the near future. And with that, I really do thank you guys all for coming to the show, and we look forward to talking with you in some of the future broadcasts. So we'll catch you all later on. Thank you all.